And with respect to your NPPs, the dates are getting finalized, so they are in process. Once they are finalized, we'll convey the same to you either on this course or through mail. So please be a bit patient about that.
Can you please repeat the deadlines for what?
I was just saying that for NPPE, the dates are still getting finalized, and many people were asking about the same. So once they are finalized, it will be conveyed to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so as I just said, today we'll just be going through your week one. So this will mostly be like a theoretical summary and basically a motivation to why we are delving into deep learning after all that we learned in machine learning and why wasn't that sufficient. So I think this must have been discussed in the last session as well. So for this course, a basic understanding of your machine learning algos, specifically your linear logistic regression and multi-class classification. So please go back to your MLT and please revise these algos in detail because these will be used thoroughly like throughout the course. Secondly, with respect to programming, a bit of proficiency in Python, including NumPy, Pandas, and Matplotlib. So here, if you have like sufficient enough knowledge of your MLP course, that again would suffice. But again, I would suggest you to please go back and just give a very brief recap to your MLT and MLP because the learnings from both the courses will be carried forward here. Then from mathematics specifically, going back to your M2 Maths 2 course, just revise your basic calculus, specifically the chain rule. It will be used here in backpropagation algorithms, and that is like one of the very core and key concepts of DL Gen AI. So one is your chain rule in your calculus, and from linear algebra, please be acquainted with your vectors, matrices, and all the operations properties that you study there. Because here again, these things will be used extensively. So you will be required to, have a basic grasp of all these concepts. And when it comes to programming, we'll be teaching you PyTorch mainly. Okay, this is provided by your Python, and together with NumPy and Matplotlib. Development environment, you can use any, but it's recommended to either use Jupyter or Colab. Okay. So in the very first week, the uh, learnings are around why we are going from ML to DL, as in what is the need when we already have seen so many algorithms in machine learning. In MLT and MLP, you must have seen hordes of algorithms for regression, for classification, and even for other downstream tasks. So, what is the need now to go from ML to DL? Then, what is the inspiration of this neural network that we're going to talk about in DL? And then we're also going to touch upon what this learning loop is about. So, let's see. Okay. So before, I'm not just reading out the slide. Anyone here present in the meeting would just like to give a very basic, brief definition or any comments on what you understand by machine learning now that you have done two full courses on ML, MLT, and MLP, and also MLF.
Ma'am, can you repeat what you've said?
Yeah. So what do you understand by machine learning, and any comments around this?
Actually, machine learning, what is that we give a certain amount of data and
Hmm.
it predict from past label, and from past record it will see my current data and give output accordingly.
Yes, correct. So, what has been happening in machine learning models is you have a data set which you call your input data or training data. So, you have that data set ready. Then, what you do is you do some sort of pre processing, as in you clean the data, you structure it well, you will drop out some features, and you will only retain what is necessary. So, you'll first do some pre processing on it, which is again done manually by you. Okay, everything is decided by you only. That okay, I have to remove duplicates, I have to clean, I have to validate, I have to, reduce dimensions. So that again, everything in the pre-processing section is done by you. Then you build the model. So again, you have multitude of models available for machine learning. So you train, one by one, you train each of these, and then you see that, okay, this is working better depending on the performance it gives you, which you can measure by accuracy, R2 score, etc. So now what is this model doing? Once you train the model on your training data, it just simply learns from it. And what is it learning? It is learning any patterns that are existing. Okay, when we talk about clustering, it is learning any relationships, okay, that are present in the data, linear, non-linear, depending on what the task at hand is. So once you train your model and it learns from the data and it starts giving you a good enough performance on your training and validation sets, then you employ this model on your testing data. You generalize it to the world data that is coming in. Then you use this model to make an output prediction or to take some sort of action. If it's a classification task, it will either put your data into two or more buckets, okay, whatever you have. If it is a regression problem, it will assign a corresponding label to it, okay, or it will just predict something for you. So this is how the basic machine learning paradigm has been working. We have data, we have to manually pre-process, we feed it into a good enough model, it will learn from the data, and then it will help us in making some prediction out of it and will help us in giving an output at the other end. So this is how machine learning has been defined so far. Okay, and this was doing a lot of it was making our life easier and was accomplishing variety of tasks for us. But still we found that this process is fine, but there are still some loopholes. Okay, now what are those loopholes? So okay, before going into that, these are your common machine learning applications. Housing price prediction, which comes under your regression. Then autonomous vehicles lane following. This is basically your, okay, in very layman terms, you may call it a classification problem. It is basically taking in a lot of sensing parameters from your natural environment. And then on the basis of whatever the data is incoming, it will make a decision as to in which lane the car needs to drive. And it is very dynamic. So it will keep adjusting those parameters and the predictions. So it will keep driving accordingly. Then you have message sentiment analysis. This you must have seen and touched upon very briefly in your MLP course, I think towards the very end in week 10, week 12. Then you have spam filtering, which is again a classification problem, recommendation engines, image recognition. So these all were fairly done by your ML models, but still there were some loopholes, which we'll just discuss in a while. Now, while discussing about machine learning, again, these are the key concepts into which we can categorize everything in. One is again your data and the process, and the second thing is your models. So data is basically, you usually provide structured data to it in the form of a table or data frame, as you call it. So it is structured with rows and columns. And then there's a target which needs to be predicted using the features or the columns that you have. This target can either be binary for classification problems, or it can be a continuous real valued variable when it comes to your regression problems. Now, as I was telling you, you have your data, then the method first thing is you're gonna do a manual feature engineering where human experts, so you need to rope in some domain experts from the field, okay, where the problem belongs. Those people will come and tell you that, okay, these are the important features for this problem. And accordingly, you will have to extract or, optimize your data to suffice that need. So then once you have the features ready, then model is gonna learn from these engineered features, and success depends entirely on how this pre-processing had been done and how well you were able to capture and extract the features out of your data. So this is one thing, data and feature engineering. And then the other side of ML is your models, where again you have a couple of models, okay, ranging from linear to tree based. So in linear, the core idea is that you're having some linear relationships, as in, you see with linear regression, logistic regression. Now, linear regression is a regression algorithm, and logistic regression is a classification algorithm. I hope everyone remembers that. In logistic regression, we basically require linearly separable data. And what it does for us is it will basically give us the optimal W vector or the optimal hyperplane that will segregate our positive and negative classes effectively. Okay. Now, the linear models, they are fast, they are interpretable, and they are simple. But again, we are not able to capture very complex or non-linear relationships using these linear models. So then we switch to some tree-based models. Decision tree is very one, straightforward example from tree-based models. And then if you go to your ensembling, you have random forest gradient boosting. So here you are basically training, uh, you know, multiple classifiers together and then accumulating the results, and then just adopting the best classifier or adopting the best results from this training setup to your final output. So now here, this is able to capture your non-linearity. So in a way, it is more powerful than your linear model setup. So this is nothing new. This is what you have been seeing from MLT, MLP, okay? How you have the data, then you pre-process it, then you do some modeling. It gives you some performance metric, and then you finally employ it to your test data. So this is what you know already. Now, the thing is, there are some limitations or there are some bottlenecks, as we call it. I hope people are okay. Yeah. So before I go ahead and explain these to you, would anyone like to just give us a very brief recap or a brief comments on what these are about? If you've watched the lectures and gone through week 1 thoroughly. Anyone? Okay, so now we have some limitations or some bottlenecks of traditional ML, and which is why there was a need to delve into deep learning and then develop neural network like architectures. So now what are these limitations which prompted us to actually go ahead and build our ANNs, then we'll study CNNs, RNNs again going forward, but that is a very advanced concept at this level. But what are the limitations of traditional ML? So there are four, as they call it here. One is your feature engineering bottleneck. So again, while I was discussing your feature pre-processing, I said that the entire process is manual. Okay. you have to decide, okay, these are my important features. Then you only have to go and clean it and extract it and reduce dimensions, etc. So what happens is the entire process becomes very time consuming. Okay. Second is, as a machine learning engineer, suppose you don't really know, okay, what features might be important for a specific problem. So what you require is the expertise of domain experts for that specific problem. So that again adds to your overheads, okay, in terms of effort, cost, and time. So somebody else, like domain expert, has to come in and then they have to tell you that, okay, these are the important features and work on these, okay. But again, that is not very efficient. So this all is suboptimal, as we say it. So one is your feature engineering bottleneck, that everything is manual and you require the supervision of a domain expert. Second is inability to handle high dimensional data. Now, what is happening is, if you saw even your MLP course, every time there was a data set, it was entirely textual and numerical. But I don't think so you ever dealt with images, audio, video, or very raw text or unstructured data for that matter, even in your MLP exercises, assignments, and projects, okay, whatever you had. Why? Because these ML models, okay, like you have linear regression, you have logistic, you have a lot of other algorithms. Each of these models require very structured data, okay, very uniform, properly scaled data. And that is why we cannot directly input your images to a linear regression model. We cannot directly feed in your audio or unstructured raw text. So that is not acceptable, because the entire ML algorithms which you studied, they are based around getting being trained on data which is inherently structured, okay, which has a proper structure to it, that these are the attributes, these are the corresponding records, and this is the scaling factor, these are the proper ranges and count, mean, and the statistical properties of it. So what is happening is, all these ML algorithms, they struggle a lot with your images, audio, and such type of data. So it is basically unable to handle very high dimensional or very dynamic sort of data, okay, which is available in all sorts of formats. Third one is limited representation learning. Now, what is happening is, when we say that your ML model is learning something, it is basically learning some sort of pattern or relationship. And pattern, I told you, is like your clustering, and relationship is like your, whether it has a linear pattern, and how the data set has been distributed. So all of that stuff. But again, that is just first level, okay? So ML model, what it will do, if your data set, suppose this is your data set. So it will just learn that, okay, there is some sort of positive correlation between the data points, and the data set is, okay, somewhat linearly distributed. But again, that's just, first level view of it. Now, when I look deeper, suppose in this section here. Now, in this section here, which is just a very small subset of the entire data, there might be some other relationships. Okay, I mean, I'm just drawing this at random, but there might be some other relationships. Or suppose in this section, the data points are following a normal distribution, okay, or they're following some quadratic relationship in between them. But your linear model or ML model is not able to capture it, because it only is able to work with this black line, which is your first level view of the data, which says that, okay, this is linearly distributed. It doesn't really let the model to go deeper into the data subsets and to again check for relationships if there exist any more relationships, in between other subsets of data. Like here I told you that maybe the points are normally distributed, but it will never be able to identify this because the model at first predicted that it's a linear model. So that is the end of discussion for your machine learning. Now to capture such relationships, you have to delve into deep learning. Okay, it solves this problem by through its architecture of ANN. That obviously we will see in upcoming slides how it does that. But I hope you all are getting the motivation as to why there is a need to go from ML to DM. So that is what they mean by that. It learns only shallow patterns. Okay, only the very first bird eye view of the data distribution, but it is not able to learn deep or hierarchical features for that matter. Okay, so this is what we call a hierarchical feature or a hierarchical relationship, as in the data set, the complete data set was linear, but within the data set, a particular subset was normally distributed. So this is what we mean by hierarchical features. And lastly, you have performance plateaus. So adding more data to your training set yields diminishing returns after a certain point. So what it means is, suppose you are training your model on some 100 samples, okay, and the accuracy currently is 95%. Now, from 100, you move to 250 samples. So accuracy increased from 95 to 99. Okay, this is just a hypothetical example. Now you go to 500. Okay, what is gonna happen now? Anyone? I'm not able to write properly, but anyways. So from 100, you first went to 250, and now I wish to go to 500. Here accuracy was 95. Here it was 99. What will happen in this case? Will it increase, decrease, or what do you think should happen? Okay, I'll just repeat the question. You had 100 training samples, okay? Accuracy was 95%. Then you increased the samples to 250. Accuracy became, somewhere around 98, 99. Now you are increasing the samples again to 500. What do you think will happen to accuracy?
It will increase.
Okay, who
It
was
will
that?
decrease, I think.
Okay, so Mayank says it will increase, then Brithika says it will decrease. I mean, you also have to give me a reason, no? I mean,
Sir, ma'am, actually, the number of training data we
hmm.
are giving, and more the my model will study it,
Okay.
and accordingly it will give prediction. So
Okay.
it will get more number of
Hmm.
data to
So my question to
in.
you is, my question, a follow-up question to that is, will this happen always? Now the word in
Actually,
quotes is all.
for a certain amount of data asset, it will increase, and then it will be somewhat same. Actually, it will for maybe for 100 to 250, it will increase, might be in percentage, it might be more, but
Hmm.
from 500 to, suppose when we give 1000, there will be a comparatively less increase.
Okay, so this is what you are suggesting. Okay, somewhat like this. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we had Brithika. What do you have to say?
Ma'am, I think it will decrease because as the data increases, sometimes there are errors, outliers in the data, which may lead to the decrease in the performance of data.
Okay. Anyone else? You have these two options here, and what do you think is the right answer, or if anyone wishes to suggest a third one? Okay, no comments. Okay, so guys, you're missing one thing here. The accuracy was already, somewhere around 98, 99 when I was giving it 250. Don't you think if I increase the samples, these are training samples only, by the way, to 500, don't you think it will overfit considerably?
Ma'am, it will depend on the model, no, ma'am. Means in decision tree, we know that it overfits,
Hmm.
but if we use sort of linear regression or logistic regression,
Yeah, I mean, you're
then
right. It will depend obviously on what the algorithm that we're using. I mean, some algorithms are sensitive to your outliers and the noise, and so they overfit, and some may not be. But generally, what happens is if you're, reaching a near perfect accuracy at 250, so generally, if you increase the samples again, okay, it is gonna overfit your training data to some extent. And now, when you're gonna test it again on your testing data, in most cases, I think 75-80%, there's a chance that accuracy here from 95 will come down to somewhere around 90. So this is what I was saying is this is a classic case of your overfitting. Here, when the accuracy was 95, 98, 99, and you were getting a very perfect model out of it, if you keep increasing the training samples, what happens is, however perfect the model is, it starts memorizing the data because a lot of training sample together with some sort of inherent bias is, it gets memorized by the data directly. And then when you generalize it to some test data, the accuracy, in most cases, it is seen that it drops. So what they say is, I don't know if you've studied this in MLP, but what they say is you have to basically track your losses across iterations. And once your validation loss, okay, begins to drop, you have to stop then and there, because what will happen is if you keep training it for multiple iterations, or if you keep feeding it more and more samples, after one point it is seen in 80-85% of the cases that even your validation loss starts increasing. And then we resort to these dropouts and stopping criterions. So all of that is based around this principle itself. So generally what happens is, again, see, every algorithm and every model is going to behave differently because each of these have a different architecture. But generally it is seen that if you keep increasing the samples, even though the accuracy had reached near perfect, but if you keep increasing the samples, so for any model, however perfect, after one point of time, it will start overfitting considerably. And then your performance on the testing data is gonna be affected, and it's gonna be lower than what you were able to achieve using fewer samples. So in out of 1 and 2, actually nothing is right. It's basically it will first go up, okay? It will not stay like this, and it will not drop very considerably. It will be somewhere in middle. So it will not stay the same, okay? The accuracy will not stay the same like as you're increasing the samples. And again, it will not drop very considerably, okay, from that point. It will drop, but it will be, a slow or gradual drop, because again, which is seen because of overfitting. So the correct answer here was it was somewhere in between your options 1 and option 2. I hope everyone understands this. So this is what they mean by that adding more training data yields diminishing returns. This is basically your economics concept that if you keep investing, so after a point the returns get diminished, again based on certain principles. So if you keep adding more data, your returns will be diminishing after a certain point. And majorly the reason behind this is your overfitting. I hope everyone is comfortable with these 4 points, which are the 4 primary bottlenecks of machine learning. If there's any doubt, please let me know, else we'll move forward. Okay. So now that you know that you have certain loopholes in your ML paradigm, so you shift to a completely new paradigm. I won't say completely new, but obviously an adjustment to your ML framework. Now you shift to deep learning. Okay. So in the word deep itself, deep learning. See, it's again learning. Learning will always be there. But now from machine learning to deep learning. Deep why? Because now it will assess everything, whether it is some feature engineering, some feature extraction, whether it is identifying pattern and relationships, whether it is your, what do we call it, uh, yeah, I mean the larger feature extraction framework. So it will be dealt at a very deep level. Okay, it will not yield anything superficial. Okay, it will not just output a simple linear relationship. It will also probe into the subsets of your data, and it will check if there are any more relationships exist there. And then on the basis of everything, it is gonna make a prediction, and that obviously is much more mature and much more nuanced than what your ML predicts. So that is why the word deep, because now it's not just a shallow interpretation of your data, but there are many layers to it, and each layer is gonna learn a different feature. Each layer is gonna extract a different feature or different relationship out of your training data, which you're able to see here in this figure. So this traditional ML we have discussed. We have raw data, then we do manual feature in engineering, and then you train the model and it's straightforward. Now here what is happening in deep learning is, again, the architecture we'll be discussing afterwards. But what happens is you have some input and then you have some architecture. Okay, this is basically your model. So you have some input and then you have some architecture. Now see, the job here is so simple that you take your input, and it can be anything. It can be raw text, structured text, image, audio, okay, whatever. Although we see that we do, convert your audios into some sort of vector embeddings. But again, that's a very simple process compared to what you are doing here. Like here, you have to do complete feature engineering, but here nothing like that is required. So here, okay, just pass raw text, or maybe after one simple iteration, you pass this raw text to your model, and this model's job is to itself, so it works this way. This is basically your red model. What it does is it takes your data and then it has something known as layers. So it has multiple layers. You can also, in very layman terms, you can think of it as your linear regression model, and now you're taking some 50 or 100 models together and stacking them side by side. And once you stack all of those together, you get your deep learning model. So something around that, okay, from a very deep, from a very, first view of things. But what happens is you pass your data through the model. It has these layers. Now these layers automatically will take your data and they will extract features. If you see here, these black edges, These are basically your connections in between the layers which help you extract these features. And these slices here, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, these are basically how the features are getting extracted and how the features are getting learned across your deep learning model. And once you pass your raw data here through this model, this is what you get. This is basically the features that the model has extracted, the features that the model has learned for you. And this happens, mind you, automatically. You are not doing anything here, no manual intervention, no manual feature pre-processing, extraction, PCA, this, that, nothing is required. The model has been designed in such a way that take the input, anything, okay, be it text, audio, whatever, take the input, pass it through the model layers, the model interconnections, and the model architecture is designed in such a way that all the features, all the relevant features from the data will be extracted automatically. Okay, this is the process through which it gets extracted. And then you will get the refined set of features at the other end. So this is your feature extraction process. Now what happens in DL is sometimes the model extracts features and makes the prediction or whatever task you wish it to perform together. So you use just one model for both your feature extraction and your uh, prediction, as in, see here you will get some output. So one framework is where the feature extraction and learning is done side by side, and prediction is also done by the same model. So you just require one model here. In other cases, what happens is you have two such models here. Okay, both from your deep learning only. So one model, the first model, just extracts your features. Okay, this is what it will give you. And then you pass these extracted features through your second model, and then this will give you a prediction. And then there are multiple variations to this again. So, but here the main point to consider is how deep learning over ML is able to extract the features and engineer the features, all the relevant features present in the data automatically through the very architecture on which it is based on. And again, as I told you, you can use the same model to even make a prediction out of it, or you can use one model to feature extract, and then you can use one more model to finally make a prediction. That we will see obviously when we're gonna study this DL in depth, and the types of models and architectures that we have there. But right now, just understand that deep learning reduces your work considerably. And again, now because it is deriving all the features by itself, there is no need for any outside domain expert to come and tell you that, okay, these are the important features. The DL architecture has been designed in such a way that it will get hold of everything that is important by itself. So you don't have to tell it explicitly. Okay. Again, but in some very, high, like critical problems, suppose you're making a rocket or something, there again, there is a domain expert is needed for supervision, obviously, because you cannot go wrong and accuracy required is 100%. But generally, while solving for DL problems, there is no need for a domain expert as such. So this is your core idea. Model learns directly from raw data. You don't have to do any processing or engineering. It is able to handle your image, text, audio, and no manual engineering is required. And now, why have we shifted to this sort of a DL framework? So again, very simple. It is solving for our feature engineering bottleneck, which we just saw in one of the previous slides, where basically you had to manually pre-process everything, and it was a time-consuming procedure. Then it automates representation learning and it unlocks new complex capabilities. So these pointers you will see as we are gonna study deep learning, how this is achieved. So unlocking new complex capabilities is it's just that because it is able to learn a lot of relevant features. So it is also able to learn very complex relationships within data, which your ML was not able to learn. And that is why it is able to unlock any complex representations that you have. And automates representation learning. It again deals with your automatic feature extraction and thereby automatically able to identify patterns and relationships. So I hope this makes sense now. Why from ML we are moving to DL and how DL through its very intrinsic architecture is saving us a lot of time, saving us a lot of effort, and just helping us in unimaginable ways. If there's any doubt, please let me know. And uh, these are your popular deep learning applications, specifically computer NLP, speech recognition, and robotics. Now, each of these fields in itself, they are very dense. Okay, they are very advanced. In computer vision itself, this is a full-fledged course. So, but just understand that here, this is about something related to your images. Okay, object detection, then image generation and classification. NLP deals with everything text. So now you have Wikipedias and large documents, so you have to make sense of it through some sort of sentiment analysis, okay, through some sort of you have translation task here, you have named entity task here. Again, it's a bit advanced level at this stage. Just understand that it's dealing with text. Speech recognition, as it suggests, it deals with your speech and audio. And here, the main tasks are your TTS, which is text to speech, and speech recognition, obviously. So, in speech recognition, what is done is you have a speaker or a speech or audio sample, and you have to basically get the text out of it, okay? The transcribe, okay, that or transcription that you call it, like those subtitles that you see when a person is speaking, that is done through the speech recognition. And you have your TTS. TTS is when you have some text and you want the model to generate speech out of it. So TTS is like a more complex step. But again, we'll see how that is handled. And then you have this game playing and robotics. This is your reinforcement learning, if you have some idea about it. And in reinforcement learning, what happens is you have some robot or some game. It makes some move, then it receives some feedback as to how the move was. Was it good, bad, optimal, not optimal, suboptimal? And then on the basis of feedback, it corrects its course of action and then it makes another move. So this is basically your RL, which is reinforcement learning. Now, these are very advanced fields and advanced branches in your deep learning. So we'll not be touching upon everything in this very course. This course is basically to give you a sense of what DL at an introductory level is. Because even in degree level, if you see the courses, we have a full-fledged DL course, and then we have a couple more courses like DLP, DLCB, and even RL is there. Okay, NLP, everything is there. So these, all of these will be covered in detail in degree level, but sure, it will mostly be an introduction to all of these. These are your key differences between ML and DL, and please do keep this in mind even from your examination point of view. So machine learning, so we have already discussed this, so I'm just reading out the slides. Machine learning is manual feature engineering, and in deep learning, it is automatic. Machine learning, you have shallow pattern or representation. In deep learning, you can probe deeper and then you can build a hierarchy of features through your deep learning architecture layers. Then, when it comes to ML, it can work well on small to medium data, as we saw that when we increase the samples from 250 to 500, a lot of problems like overfitting and fitting on noise and outliers, all these problems erupt, right? And there is no way to go about it uh, rather than taking maybe a shorter sample for your training. But nothing like that exists in deep learning. Even when you have a very large data set, it excels quite well. And there is no this problem that, okay, that's gonna overfit or anything like that, because the architecture that we are gonna design is very intelligent. So if it is able to extract features by itself in a very carefully designed manner, so you can be sure that it will automatically, invent some mechanism within it which will prevent the model from actually overfitting on data per se. So these deep learning models are very good in that sense with your uh, large data sets as well. Now, these are the key differences, and here also you can see why there is a need to move from ML to DL now. Yeah, and then the training paradigm is it enables end-to-end learning. So what is end-to-end? End-to-end, because you just have to input your data, and everything from feature extraction to model training to model output will be done by that black box, okay, with layers. I told you that model is capable of extracting features together with making predictions and finally giving you an output. And that is what is meant by end-to-end learning. So you just have to input your data. Okay, you don't have to do anything else. It will learn the features itself. Then the model will learn the patterns and relationships, and then the model will give you the final output. So that is what your deep learning is about. And then they say that what enabled this deep learning revolution. So, what this slide suggests is that how this deep learning revolution or how this shift was actually facilitated by the resources that had been erupting all this while. So, one is that there was this wave of big data. So, we were able to, all those ML engineers and all these professionals were able to get hold of a lot of data sets which are massive, which are labeled. And this big data revolution, okay, it helped us in training good deep learning models, because unlike ML, see what happens in ML is if a lot of data, it will start overfitting, as we discussed. What happens in DL is you give it ample of data, okay, you give it billions, trillions, any amount of data, the overfitting is very rare, okay, less than 0.005%. So this deep learning architectures, they are said to be hungry, they are said to be hungry models. So you feed any amount of data that you want to, they will very happily take it all in, and very happily they won't overfit, but they will just use it to refine your predictions better. So the architecture has been designed in such a way that it won't really overfit, but it will keep improving and improving on the basis of how much data you're providing it. So then once we had Wikipedia and this ImageNet, so we had a lot of data, okay, on which we could train our models, and that is why this deep learning took a hit. Then you have your computational power. Now you can understand that the data, like there is no limit to the data that you have, okay, you are able to provide ample and lots of data to your model. Second is your model architecture, where you have a model with a lot of layers, okay, and again it happens that if you increase the number of layers in this model, it will keep learning better and improved features, and the model as a whole will keep improving. Okay. So again, for those many layers and for those many parameters, weights, or whatever you want to call it, you would require a lot of computational power. And again, we saw a rise of GPUs, specifically powered by NVIDIA. I hope everyone is following that. So there was this rise of GPUs, okay, and parallel power. So this made deep training of these deep learning models quite feasible, and also drastically cut training time, because without proper computational power, training such an architecture with a lot of data would become, I mean, it will take a lot of time compared to your ML models. But if you if you employ your GPUs are nothing. It's basically your, distributed computing, basically your parallel power, where you can just distribute your computation across multiple nodes at one time, and will compute everything simultaneously. So because we saw a rise of GPUs, it drastically cut our training time, and it made the training of our deep architectures very feasible and very possible. And then third was better algorithms. So what was happening is, we were coming up with these architectures, but again, there were a lot of innovations that were happening, in the architectural designs. Okay. Then we saw the rise of transformers, CNNs. CNNs are used for your image data. Transformers are, again, a, a deep learning architecture, which is mostly employed in your chat GPTs, and it's basically an improvement on your RNNs, which again you're gonna study going forward. But there were a lot of innovations that were seen along the model architecture. So this is one architecture where you have this black box, multiple layers. You pass the you pass the input and you get the output. This is your ANN. So this basic architecture which I've been talking about is your basic ANN. But then there were many innovations happening. So we got CNNs, we got transformers, and many other architectures and algorithms. So they were basically we were getting smarter models and smarter training methods, so to say. And so a combination of all of these, big data, power, and better architectures and algorithms, it basically, gave this deep learning revolution a lot of power, and that is why it was able to evolve as a field, okay, in a much accelerated way, I should say. And this happened, not very, I mean, this has been quite recent, like not old than a decade or two. So somewhere around 2008, 2010 was when this deep learning revolution, started to take its uh, fury form. Okay. I hope things are clear up until here. If there's any doubt, any question, any comments, anything, please let me know. Then this is your AI Venn diagram. This is quite popular. So you basically have your artificial intelligence as the universal superset. Then within AI, you have machine learning. Then within machine learning, you have deep learning. And then within deep learning, again, as you go more deep, as you make your architectures more nuanced and more mature, okay, even more mature than that black box with layers, you get something known as generative AI, which again we're going to discuss in the second half of the course. So, okay, any idea as to why is this relation happening here? This one. Why is DL considered a part of ML? Anyone? It might not be easy for you to answer because you haven't really seen the architectures yet. But any guesses why? I mean, we understand that deep learning is an improvement on machine learning and it's solving for a lot of problems. But why is DL specifically, it's considered a subset of ML? Any comments?
Because it is derived after ML, means more advanced and more accurate version.
Okay. Okay. Actually, the correct answer here is, uh, I mean, I told you it was not easy for you to answer because you have not seen the architectures yet. The deep learning, the very first model that I'm going to show you is that of a perceptron. Okay. And if perceptron rings some bell, uh, I guess everyone is able to understand that perceptron is something which you studied in your MLT classification algorithms. I think right after logistic, you guys studied perceptron. And this deep learning, it started from, I mean, it took that perceptron, okay, and then it made the entire architectures on top of that perceptron. So perceptron is like the basic foundation of your deep learning. And since perceptron is now your, it's just one part of your complete ML syllabus. So to say that is why we say that deep learning, because it is primarily based only on that perceptron. That perceptron is basically your, what do we call it? It's basically your block for all the models that you're gonna build in DL. So perceptron is that block. And now perceptron is just a small part of your entire ML, and that is why DL is considered a part of ML. Because in DL, all the architectures that that I talked about, ANN, CNN transformers, and that you're gonna study, they actually started out with a very simple perceptron. So I hope that difference is clear. And in artificial intelligence, that again is from degree level. So here you have some search methods and logics and all of that. So that uh, you won't be able to understand now. And here in generative AI, again, what will happen is in deep learning, you will study something known as transformers, and that is a very very popular architecture. The chat GPTs that you use, like all these LLMs, they for them the basic building block is transformer, and then their architectures are built upon those transformer blocks. So like ChatGPT have some multiple, like billions of blocks of those transformer architectures stacked vertically, and then that is why you get such prompt answers from GPT, because I mean, it's just a very vast ensemble of your transformer architecture. And then, on the basis of this transformer, basically taking this transformer as a building block, your generative AI was born. And that is why Gen AI is considered a subset of DL. So from ML, they first stole your perceptron idea and then built the entire deep learning field out of it. Then from deep learning, they liked transformers, so they stole transformers from there, and then they built the entire generative AI field over it. So that is why this hierarchy. I mean, this is the hierarchy basically. It's okay if you're not able to understand everything right now, or we'll study everything one by one going forward. And I think everyone understands this. So I'm not really explaining this, it's from biology. Anyways, so this is just to give you an inspiration as to what a neuron will look like in deep learning. So they are taking the inspiration now from brain. So what they did was they took perceptron idea from your ML, then they liked your neural network or the neuron from brain. So they took one idea from there, and then they combined these ideas, and then they evolved everything into your deep learning framework. So now this is your neuron. I guess everyone must have seen it. This is 10th class biology. So these are the dendrites that receive signal from here. You have some cell body or soma, and then it has this long uh, dendrite here, okay, which connects it to other neurons, which we call the axon. And if threshold is met, so basically there is some threshold or there's some condition. If that is met, it fires, or it basically sends off a signal. Okay, this is how your biologic neuron works. And now this is the inspiration which deep learning engineers took, and then they designed something known as a McCulloch-Pitts neuron, okay, that we are going to study next, which you just gonna see. And the important point to remember from this slide is just this, that if threshold is met, the neuron fires. Everything else is biology. Okay, you're not expected to know that. Just understand that we'll be designing something, okay, close to this neuron. There's gonna be some input, okay. There's gonna be a body or something, and then if some condition is met, it's gonna fire or it's gonna send a signal. Now, obviously, we're not in our neural system, so it's gonna send a signal means it's gonna send a signal to the next layer, or it's gonna just output your prediction at the other end. So now see, this is your. We'll come to your perceptron as a foundational block in some time. First, this is your biologically inspired neuron. So that is what we're gonna study first. So now here, what is happening is this here is your complete neuron. These x1, x2, xn, these are your inputs. Okay, these you may consider as the dendrites. So these are your inputs, x1, x2, xn. Then this is your cell body. This is, the body where some sort of processing is going on. And then it will send off some output, or it will do some performed job on the basis of some condition. And condition is given by this thing here. I hope everyone is able to see how this compares with your biological neuron. You have some neurons, okay, which are connected through dendrites, so to say. As a cell body, it will pass off something as an output if a condition is met. So this is the idea which deep learning engineers, they got inspired by biological neuron, and then they converted that into a mathematical model. And this is your simple MP neuron, as we call it. Okay, this is your basic block of your ANNs. Okay, in ANNs, while I was discussing that you have this black box and then you have these layers. So in these layers, these are made of neurons, multiple neurons, like a lot of neurons stacked together. And this one single unit here is this. This again is a very simple form. Again, you can make this complex, which we'll see in a while. So what is this doing is, I told you, you have some inputs here, x1, x2, xm. Okay, then this is your body, or this is your model now in terms of your DL lingo. And then on the basis of some threshold, some condition, it's gonna report some output to you. Okay. So it takes multiple binary inputs. So currently we are only discussing the very first neuron which your DL engineers made. And the first neuron they made was for only for binary inputs. So these XIs, they can only be 0 or 1. Okay. So what it does, it takes binary inputs. You have a lot of inputs here and they can either be 0 or 1. Okay, each of these inputs is striking here at this body. What this body does is it calculates their sum. Simple. That is why this summation symbol here. So this summation symbol will simply calculate x1 plus x2 all the way up to xm. And then see this. This is your output and it says that it belongs to 0, 1. So your output is also binary. Okay, output can also be either 0 or 1. Now, how is that decided? They say that once you calculate the sum, if the sum is greater than or equal to a fixed threshold, so this is your threshold here, or this is the condition that you're gonna check. So if your sum is greater than this condition, it's greater than this threshold, you're gonna output 1 as the output, or you're gonna output 0 otherwise. So this is how your DL engineers converted the idea of a biological neuron to a very simple mathematical model. And this is what they made out of it, that you're going to take inputs. They can either be 0 or 1 for the sake of simplicity. In the cell body, you just sum everything up. If they pass the condition or if they are above a certain threshold, then on the basis of that, you're going to decide whether it's going to take a 0 value or a 1 value. And these are the, basically this is the condition that if it is greater, then you give it 1, else you give it 0. So this is basically your first mathematical model of a neuron. And it operates on a simple principle. If enough inputs are active, the neuron fires. So again, as I told you that this thing here, firing is basically, sending a signal off or calculating something or prompting something. So if the sum here is, it passes this condition, so it's gonna fire or it's gonna send an output of 1. Okay. But if the sum was not able to meet the threshold, it will not fire or it will send an output of 0. It's basically like your switch. So if it is, if the sum is enough, the switch will be on. So it will give you 1. Otherwise, the switch will be off and you'll get a 0. So basically, they converted your biological neuron to this simple mathematical model. And this sort of a very simple network architecture networks of these simple units could compute any logical function like AND or. So I hope you all must be familiar that we have these gates like AND gate or gate. So AND gate is like you have two inputs and you have an AND gate in between. So if both the inputs are 1, only then your AND gate will give you a 1, else it will give you a 0. In OR, what happens is either of the 1 inputs is 1, it will give you a 1, else it will give you 0. So this is coming from your Boolean algebra, which you study in your computational logic. And all this is school stuff. So I'm assuming that most of you must be familiar with this. So this is how the first mathematical model of a neuron was made. But again, this is very simple, obviously, and it cannot do all the jobs, okay, of this complex architecture, which I told you. If they have to actually feature extract, okay, and learn and do all the complex things themselves, you cannot really rely on such a simple architecture or simple model. Obviously, it had to be improved. And we'll see how we will improve it. So obviously, as I told you, it's very simple. You can see that there's just one, input entry, then some very simple operation, and then a firing. And obviously, it cannot solve the big task for us. So that is why it has some limitations. Okay. This MP neuron was more like a fixed logic gate, as I told you, and or not. And it could compute as in one operation, but obviously it could not learn. It could not learn. It could not do a lot of other things as well. So no feature importance. Yeah. So here, these are your inputs, or you may say that these are your, feature values. X1 to Xn, you have some n features, and corresponding to n features, you have these input values. So there is no feature importance. I mean, it's just taking the sum casually, like X1 plus X2 plus Xn. There is no feature importance associated with it. So equally, features are all equally important and they cannot prioritize key features. So the missing piece is weights. Weights are missing basically from the neuron. Second is no automatic learning. Why there is no automatic learning? Because the threshold you are providing here, this theta. Now this theta is not decided by the model. This is something that you have provided. Suppose theta is 5. So that is something that we are manually providing it. So again, how is how is our job made simpler, or how is this deep learning? I mean, there's nothing deep still here. Okay, there has to be some sort of an improvement where this threshold is decided again automatically, so that we can say that okay, now we are in the deep learning paradigm. But here, it's not happening because threshold is fixed and we have to set it manually. So basically, we have to set a learning rule or some sort of, a learning objective for the network that this will automatically learn. And third is, we restricted it to binary input output, which again is a very, very simplistic case. Inputs and outputs are 0 and 1, and currently it cannot handle real value data. Now, if it is not able to handle real value data, how will it handle your images and text and audio and video, right? So that is why this was very, 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 basic, like a first step neuron. And because of these critical limitations, this was just discarded off, okay? And then we'll see that some newer architectures arose, and those proved quite a lot useful. And they were but this was still acted as a small bit of inspiration to build those complex models. So remember that no feature importance is there yet because of the missing weights. Automatic learning not there because still the threshold needs to be set by us, and currently the binary only the binary inputs outputs are allowed, so there's a restriction per se. And to deal with that, now, here is your perceptron, as I've been calling it, that these DL people stole the idea of perceptron from ML, and then they built the entire, DL field around it. So now this is what I was talking about. So they actually took help of your perceptron, which we'll see in a while. But if there's any doubt up until here, please let me know. Okay, I see a lot of people have left the meeting already because the time was set to 9 p.m. So, fine, we'll carry on with perceptron in the next class. But please go through all these slides, initial slides, and please try to get a sense as to why this DL is important and why this paradigm shift was adopted in the first place. And I think we've had a thorough discussion about it. Okay, if there's any doubt.
Yeah, one question on when we will start the coding practice. Yeah.
Okay, so I think from tomorrow's session, most probably, or from the next week, maybe.
Okay, so because this is the part of week one
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah, the
documentation.
tensor computation and a lot of NumPy and Panda stuff, I
Yes.
guess.
So we will start from the tensor basics or
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, from the tensor basics, as in whatever is covered in the lectures.
Mhm.
And if you still want, some sort of NumPy and Pandas basics, I think the most relevant thing here is the workshops that were held. So that was the main purpose, basically, because we knew that, a lot of courses required uh, NumPy and Pandas fundamentals. So that is why if you just go through the workshop content, that would be helpful. Else, I'll just, tell the other TA to just give you a very brief recap of fundamentals before, delving into tensors and PyTorch.
When these workshop happened, I have no
These
idea.
workshops happen, after like in the term break, they happen. So these workshops happened, I guess, last month from 15 to 25th Jan, something around that. And there were a series of workshops like on NumPy Pandas and even on Matplotlib and several others. Okay, I'll just stop the recording for this session.